So this is an extra piece of footage that I wanted to share with you guys, which is part of our series on masculinity. We've got 2 official episodes out already, and in the second episode, I spoke to Neil Smedley, who owns the King Kobe barbershops in the north of England. We had a really interesting discussion, and I didn't feel like I could do his story justice by trying to cut it all into the second episode. So I've got the full 40 minutes here for you guys to watch if you want to. We speak about lots of different things, including suicide. So if you're affected by any of the issues that we discuss, there are links below and people that you can speak to. Now, these are Neil's opinions, not the opinions of The Guardian, but that is the point of this series. We're here to speak to different people, hear about their perspectives and their experiences. So this discussion with Neil picks up from a conversation we'd been having off camera about suicide, and it goes from there. We talk about his personal life and lots of different things. If you want to stay up to date with all of the other things we're doing in this series, like, comment and subscribe. On the question of like the extreme where it goes when you don't have a sense of purpose or you feel really lost, like if there's a crisis, whether it's a new thing or not, what do you make of that? Like, do you think that's a weak decision to make? Do you think that, do you understand why people do something like that?
Yeah, and too often we say, oh, I can't understand that. When if we reverse engineer it, we can understand it perfectly, because we've all been depressed, we've all been anxious, we've all had times that have felt impossibly dark and want to get out of it. So understanding that I don't have an issue with. Is it a weak decision? And this will be controversial. Yes, it is a weak decision.
Why do you think it's a weak decision?
I think suicide, generally speaking, and I'm not a mental health professional, so this is just my opinion, is probably the most selfish act that a human being can commit. Especially if that is, we're talking about guys, if that is a guy who is a husband and a father. I'm not getting me wrong, people that are in places that are that dark where they feel that's an option, I have nothing but empathy and compassion for those people. But what they're essentially doing is saying, look, I'm in such a dark place, I'm in such a terrible, terrible, terrible place. What I want to do, my first instinct is to escape this place and transfer the awfulness, the darkness that I'm feeling onto the people that I love that will be left behind. And all you've really done is taken your suicide and put it onto them, and you're killing them. The only difference is that you're going to kill them with a bullet that's going to take 20 years to reach them. Because for the next 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, whatever it is, your sons and your daughters, your wives and your girlfriend are going to wonder why they weren't enough for you to stick around.
But don't you think there's a lot of people who feel like they're a burden on their family, so they feel the exact opposite, like that if they weren't there, that their family would be better off?
Yeah, of course, there are people that feel that. Bear in mind, so I attempted suicide once when I was in my mid-20s, so I know a little bit from experience what I'm talking about. And in hindsight now, when I go back on that experience, I can realise that the things I was feeling at that time, one, they weren't real, and two, if I'd have analysed them properly, I would have realised that they weren't real. And as much as I felt a burden to the people around me, I knew deep down, deep down, I knew that I wasn't. And I knew that my absence from here would cause far more pain for the people left than it would heal my own pain. And this, I guess, comes back to the feelings and emotions question where, and people say this all the time, well, I feel this, so it must be true. Well, no. Your feelings don't indicate truth, and your perceptions don't indicate truth. And what we need to do is get away from the way you feel and encourage men to explore what's actually true. Are you actually a burden to the woman that loves you? Are you actually a burden to your 3 and 4-year-old children who adore you? And the answer is no, of course not. But what we do, and we do it all the time, not even people that are suicidal, but when we're sad and depressed and down, and we're going through periods of inactivity in our lives and procrastination, we find the quickest and easiest way to justify those feelings and to keep us in that place. Because there's some comfort in sadness, right? There's something else no one wants to talk about. There's some comfort in having an identity of sadness. So I know people that have been depressed for 10 years, and you ask them, how are you feeling? And then it's a drain because they'll go into a big monologue about how depressed they are. If you're depressed after 10 years, then you need to have a look at the way in which you're dealing with your depression. You need to have a look at the way you're dealing with it, because that's then become an identity for you. People get an identity for having the attention of constantly being asked, how are you, how are you, how are you, how are you? And I get it, there's some comfort there. And you don't want happiness or to break out of that, because what happens when you're not asked the questions about how you are and you're getting the comforting feelings? So I think that generally speaking, suicide is the most selfish thing that you can do. And when you look at the main reasons for male suicide especially, I think it's generally people from 35 to 45, so there are financial issues, divorce issues. All of those things can be underpinned by those men having adopted at some point real meaning and responsibility in their lives. We say all of the time, and everyone knows it to be true, money doesn't matter, money's not the only thing that matters. And we all say that, and we all believe it, and yet we hit money crisis, and that's the main killer of men, is that issue. But we know it's not the only thing, and we know that your absence from your family isn't going to fix anything. There is nothing in the reasons why men kill themselves that cannot be underpinned by those men adopting meaning and responsibility very, very early on in their lives. The problem is that we don't have any male figures talking about this. There are no men, and it needs to be male figures. We need men talking to men. But there are no male figures talking to 18, 19, 20-year-olds saying, look, get your house in order. Get your house in order early. Life's going to come. Life's going to be brutal. Yeah, you may fall in love and she may leave you. You may fall in love and she may cheat on you. You may have a child and it may be lost in infancy. You may build an empire and you may lose it. There are real things that are waiting for you. Malevolence is waiting for you. Evil is waiting for you. Hard times are waiting for you. And prepare them then. And tell them that the antidote to that is to find meaning now, so that when those times come, you have an iron rod, if you like, to hold on to, that will get you through that storm, and that you can come again. There isn't a voice for that. So when these tough times do come, it feels like the end of the world. It feels like there is no coming back from those situations.
When we talk about this, there's like general examples and there's facts and statistics, but you like mentioned that you attempted suicide in your 20s. What were the thoughts that you had at that time? But what was it before that you were thinking about, and what was it that kind of that changed like after you survived that suicide attempt?
This is the reason why I think I can be so brutally honest with other people's situations, because I'm brutally honest with my own. So when I look back at that time, and I was 28, 29, so it's 10 years ago, what led up to that was cowardice on my part. It was pure cowardice. There's no other word for it. So I was in a dark place, yes. Things in my life were going drastically wrong, yes. I was having lots of memories and flashbacks to events that happened in my childhood which were very traumatic, yes. All of those things were real. My motivation for doing what I did was a cry for help, and because I was too scared, too weak to face those problems head on. It was cowardice. And that isn't to say that what I was feeling wasn't real. It was very, very real. But when I look back now in hindsight, and I look back at being genuinely honest, I didn't really want to kill myself. I didn't want my life to end. I just wanted the pain of that situation to end. And I think that's what we find in a lot of these guys that want to commit suicide, especially in the guys that try to commit suicide and fail, is that they don't want to die. What they want is that situation to end. Yeah? And what better way of doing that than taking the responsibility that you have to heal yourself and your family and offloading that in the most dramatic of ways, which is to end your own life, or to attempt to end your own life and fail, and then you are blessed with all of the comforting words of the people around you. Either way, you've managed to avoid the responsibility that you need to fix yourself.
I didn't mean to get into this conversation here, and like I don't want to pry, but it's like when you say some of these things, I'm like, I feel like there's a lot that's unsaid. Is there any way that you feel comfortable to kind of explain when you say things happen, situations, like I feel like the lot's unsaid? And I say that to you as well because I feel like the way you're talking is like this was in the past, so I feel like I can ask that question. There
were abusive things that happened in my childhood that I'd never dealt with, just put to one side, and equally I'd spent all of my life up to that point feeling that I didn't need to deal with them. So I dealt with them in my own way, but it wasn't until I was 29 that I'd realised that the way I dealt with that is to not deal with it. That was my coping mechanism, and to continue as if those things hadn't occurred. I got married at 29. There were problems in our marriage very early on, and we both wondered whether we'd done the right thing or whether we'd made a mistake, and that was a huge burden. I was still quite religious at the time as well, so there was religious connotations to being in a marriage that you didn't want to end that early. So all of these things just combined to make this the perfect storm. So it was a perfect storm to put me in an emotional state that made me feel like I'm done with this now.
You've obviously lived a very full life with a lot going on. So like, what were the main chapters?
Well, we grew up in Scarborough. There was me and my brother Leroy. He's 18 months younger than I am. We grew up in a very religious family, so we were Mormons, LDS. And my grandparents were Mormons, my aunties, my uncles, my cousins. We were fourth or fifth generation. So Mormonism it's not just a philosophy or a belief structure, it's everything. It's a complete lifestyle. So that was a really overriding influence in my life at that point. We were extremely poor, and we grew up on a council estate in Scarborough. My dad worked 2 or 3 cleaning jobs just to get us by. My mum looked after us best we could. All the clothes and toys that we had came from second-hand shops. We had nothing. So we were really on the poverty line for a long time. My mum and dad both worked incredibly hard to get us out of that. So I remember 15, 16, they actually managed to buy the council house that we'd lived in, which was a huge achievement for them. And then my dad went on to be a policeman at the police station he used to be a cleaner at. So that was a huge achievement for him as well. And my mum taught my dad to read and write. He couldn't read and write at all. So my mum taught him that. But my dad was, my dad's still alive. So he suffered from depression. I don't know if suffering is the right word, but for the context of this. So he was quite a depressive guy growing up. He suffered all sorts of horrendous abuses. He was in and out of foster homes when he was a kid. So his anger and his frustration from his own childhood played a prominent role in my childhood and how we grew up. And then I got married really young. I got married when I was 19, lasted for 2 years, almost to the day. That largely was inspired by the religion. So in Mormonism, you get married young, you have babies young, and that's what you do, that's the path that you take. So I did that. It was a terrible decision. So I was married and divorced by the time I was 21.
But you chose the person you got married to? She was
Yeah,
the same community
they don't have arranged marriages at all. I chose the person I was going to get married to. But in hindsight, we were kids. I mean, literally, we were children. We didn't understand anything that was going on. At the same time I got married, my dad was adopted, right? So he had a mother and 2 sisters that he'd never met, never grown up with. And then one day he got a phone call at the police station where he worked saying an Irish woman's just called the police station claiming to be a mother. So we were really excited about this. There's this new family that we'd never met. And my dad went down to London the following week with my mum to meet them. And to cut a long story short, my dad ended up having an affair with one of his half-sisters that made the national news, and it was everywhere. He ended up on national radio talking about it on Richard and Judy. It was on the front page of the Daily Mail. All the nationals picked up on it. The American press picked up on it. I think mainly because he was a policeman as well at the time, so it was kind of a big deal.
And you were how old?
I was 19 when this happened. Yeah, and my brother was 17. So.
And he was still with your mum at the time?
Yeah. So this went on for 2 years of him going back and forth to London and having this affair.
And from a Mormon community as well?
Uh-huh.
That's a lot.
Yeah, so there was the Mormon connotations, there was the connotations that we lived in an incredibly small town. So everybody knew who my family was. Myself and my brother boxed, so we were known for being the boxing family. My dad was a policeman, so all of the kind of undesirables in town knew who we were because he was a policeman. My mum was a social work manager, so between the 4 of us, people in that town knew who we were. So it garnered a lot of attention, and eventually he was fired from the police, he went to court, he got a criminal record. My mum and dad divorced during that time in just an awful, ugly, hideous divorce that took its toll on everybody. My mum eventually met somebody else and she remarried. My dad met somebody else and he remarried 7 or 8 years later. But all of this put huge pressure on me and my brother, huge pressure. It was a really, really dark time in both of our lives that shaped a lot of the people that we are now. In the middle of this time, I kind of abandoned Mormonism, so just decided that I didn't have any faith in it anymore whatsoever.
Was that directly related to what had happened with your dad, or was it other things?
No, it was unrelated. I think in hindsight, it was probably a catalyst for it, but it was unrelated. I just, because I'm obsessed with knowing what's real and what's true, not just what I believe. So I question my own belief system constantly. And the more that I looked into Mormonism on a very deep level, the more questions I found that there were just no answers for. And that wasn't enough to sustain me. So I left there. I got divorced about a week, 2 weeks after my dad's court case, in large part because of the court case. I moved back in with my mum at 22, which was actually kind of nice, because I was always been a bit of a mummy's boy, and my mum was alone at that point. She hadn't met the new guy she would marry. I met a girl called Helen, who ended up being a real catalyst in my life. We were together for 2 years, and then that ended.
How was she a catalyst in your life?
She was the first person that told me I was full of shit, which I needed. So I'd realised that, not until I'd met her, but that for much of my life, I had this belief system here that I believed in, genuinely believed in, the way in which you should live, and integrity and courage and all of those things. And then on the other side of that, I had the way that I actually behaved, which didn't represent that belief system in any way. And I'd managed to circumvent that by being relatively popular, having lots of friends, being articulate, and those things hid a multitude of sins. And if you're articulate, and you'll know this, the more articulate you are, you can manipulate the world around you very easily, especially with people that are articulate. And that's something you need to realise, because being articulate is a gift. So, and I'd done that, that's exactly what I'd done. So I'd done all of these things to completely hide the fact that deep down I was completely lost, didn't have a fucking clue who I was, or where I was going, or what I was doing. Had this belief system and this way of living that I desperately wanted to achieve, but my own weakness wasn't allowing me to achieve it. And at the end of my relationship with Helen, she said, "You're not the man that you think you are. You could be, but you're not. You're full of shit. I need to go away and change it." And it really hurt. And I was really resistant to her for like a day or two. And then I sort of transcended myself and went inside and said, "Yeah, she's right. She's absolutely right. She's absolutely right." And then Helen was the catalyst for me beginning this sort of like last 10-year journey that I've been on, where I've just been trying to sort myself out and get my act together and find meaning and find responsibility and find a way to actually start living the things that I claim.
It's interesting that it was a woman.
Yeah, very interesting.
What was she like?
In terms of quality, it's quite masculine.
Oh, what does that mean?
So Helen had a great job. She was very driven. She was quite aggressive. I don't mean that in a physical sense, but if she wanted something, she would get it. She wasn't afraid to speak her mind. There was no timidness about her character whatsoever. So she intimidated me a lot, actually, because I'd never met a woman like her. I was used to dominating the situations that I was in, or dominating the friend groups that I was in. And with Helen, I couldn't do that. I couldn't get away with anything.
And you found that attractive in her?
Yeah, I found it attractive. I rebelled against it a lot as well. So I pushed the boundaries as far as I could possibly push them. But yeah, I found that attractive in her.
Did you cheat on her?
Yeah, I did. So it's interesting because I met Helen very quickly after the divorce, and so I was a big mess for at least 18 months of our relationship, and I'd caused a lot of damage in that time, just being non-committal and not doing the things that I should do, and being a bit of a fuck up. And I would hide the fact that I was a fuck up because, well, I've just come through this divorce and these things happened when I was a child, and I would just present all of this nonsense as reasons why I wasn't getting my act together. And it was essentially me saying, "Look, come on, feel sorry for me, placate me, I need you to save me," which is just cowardice. That's what it was. I spent 10 years being a coward. And yeah, she was the first person that said, "You're not who you think you are." And that led to everything changing. And I haven't seen Helen for 15 years, but even now, I have nothing but respect for her. Because if it wasn't for her in that conversation in her apartment in 2006, whenever it was, I'd probably be in a very different place to where I am now.
And so how old were you when you guys broke up?
26, 27.
So then you got married when you said you were 28, 29?
Got married when I was 29.
Okay.
Yeah, so 26 then. So 26 when me and Helen broke up, got married 3 years later.
And when you tried to kill yourself, was that before or after you got married?
That was just after. It was like 5 months after.
Okay.
But when I look back at it now, I don't believe for a second it wasn't a real, genuine suicide attempt. What it was a massive cry for help and a way of me abdicating the responsibility that I had to heal myself. And I realised that I'd spent a long time being very, very selfish as a man and looking outwardly for other people to save me. And I wanted people to tell me that my mistakes were okay, because you went through abuse and your parents were in a nasty divorce, and it's understandable you are the way you are. And that's what I wanted, and that's what I look for in people, which makes me cringe now. But looking back with complete honesty, that was the situation. That's what was going on. So when I look back at that night, it was nothing but cowardice.
And then when you look back on that night and you look at yourself now, like it's nearly 10 years later, what are like the biggest changes that you see in yourself and the life that because you say Helen triggered something in you, what?
Yeah.
So not necessarily speaking in terms of like general things like responsibility and stuff like that, like in concrete terms of like decisions that you have made, like, when you're at a crossroads and you go, I'm either going to do this or I'm going to do this. What kind of decisions have you made differently in the past 10 years which you think have helped you to have this sense of security that you seem to have?
Yeah. I don't know if there's any like specific decisions that made my life at a crossroads go in one direction or the other, but it was just a decision that never, ever, 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 ever again will I use any part of my past or any part of anything that's occurred to me as an excuse for not being the man that I know full well that I should be. That was a decision now that permeates everything else that I do. And that isn't to say that I haven't fucked up in the last 10 years. I've fucked up massively. Like, I've made some huge mistakes, massive mistakes. I've done things that I regret, I've done things that I'm ashamed of. But whilst before those things would floor me and I would present excuses for those things, now I'm completely committed to taking responsibility for the things that I do and looking at the best way of moving forward. And I think having a commitment to the truth as well has been one of the biggest things that's changed in my life since then.
You mentioned the truth a lot. I can even see it's tattooed just above your eyebrow.
Yeah.
What is for you is like the big thing about the truth, or is there something that underlies that? Is there like I don't know, it's just you've mentioned it so many times whilst we've been talking.
We talk about meaning a lot, and I think we've spoken about meaning a lot rather, and I think one of the meanings of life is to actively seek out the truth and then speak that truth forward. And when I'm talking about the truth, I don't just mean don't tell lies, right? That's a level 1 basic thing that you teach your children. When I'm talking about truth, I'm talking about really getting to the bottom of who you are as a person and who we are, right? Find what's true about you. And oftentimes you'll find, as I found, the more I dug into myself, what was true about me was overwhelmingly hideous in the main. And I had to make a decision to let 95% of me burn to the ground.
What was hideous? You telling lies, or what? I mean, what was?
Yeah, I would lie, I would manipulate, I would procrastinate constantly. I would say A but do B. Much of my life was hypocritical up until that point. I didn't give anything my full attention at all, nothing. I would hide behind the friend group that I had, or hide behind the fact that I could perhaps put my words together better than other people. I had lots of places to hide, and that's what I did. So when I'm talking about the truth, I'm talking about really, genuinely, on a very, very, very deep level, what's true about who I was. Because unless you do that, and no one wants to do that, because the reality is you do that, and everybody, I believe this is true for everybody, you will quickly find out that 90% of you is bullshit. 90% of who you are is complete and utter bullshit. And you'll see that all the time. If someone gives you an opinion on any topic and you ask them why, 9 out of 10 people can't even answer the question why. Their entire argument falls down when you say, well, it's just what I feel, it just kind of is. It's like, no, it's not deep enough. And who wants to look into themselves and realise that, yeah, there could be a better father. Yeah, they've been a shitty husband at times. Yeah, actually, I have it in me to lie and manipulate. Nobody wants to come to those realisations about themselves. But unless you do, you can't ever become the person that you're meant to be. So I made a commitment to go into a very, very deep place that took a few months to genuinely explore who I was, why I did the things I did, why I said the things that I said, why I thought the way that I thought, why I held the opinions that I held, and figure out how much of that was really me. How much of that was worth keeping, and how much of that needed to be abandoned completely if I was ever going to move forward and become someone that I could be proud of, or my children could be proud of. And it's scary because 90% of me needed to be gone. It needed to be completely gone. But the good news about that is there was 10% of me that was left that was full of integrity and courage and truthful. And it was only 10%, but that 10% was good. And I could add more and more things to that 10% and recreate myself. That's something that everybody needs to do, but nobody wants to do it. Nobody ever wants to do that because it's painful. Who wants to admit that they're essentially a shitty person a lot of the time? Nobody wants to admit that.
One of the things you say that I find really interesting is that you came from this Mormon background, right? And so you had this kind of strong religion, and it wasn't just a religion, it's like a culture, it's like it's a lifestyle, right? And then you moved away from that, and I do feel like there's something to be said on like a bigger scale about like where we are at as, I guess, a society. Like people generally have moved away from traditional religion, and I find it interesting to see you at a Jordan Peterson event, because the way Peterson talks, he takes bits of like theology and philosophy and science and biology. I mean, sometimes I think some of the things he says need a bit of fact checking, but it's very interesting how he puts it all together. And I do wonder if some of the appeal of someone like Peterson is because of the like lack of trust and the move away from traditional religion, and that he provides like an alternative way of, I guess, assessing and finding structure. And I don't know what you think about that, but that's something that I felt like I've seen a lot.
Yeah, well, Peterson references mythology a lot, which isn't something I'd been familiar with until I found him. But I think, and he talks about archetypes a lot as well, which is something I found really fascinating. Archetypes in films and in the Bible and in the Quran. So from a religious point of view, let's just say you start from an atheist perspective and religion is nonsense, it's entirely man-made, okay, fine, we'll accept that. Is there truth still in the Bible? Yes, there is, there's truth. There's truth in there. There's truth about, there's moral truths in there, there's truths about how we should behave that we still abide to now. So whether or not these things are factual is almost completely beside the point. And that's what the archetype is. It's about looking at things that are true and how we can apply those truths to our lives. So there's scientific truth, and then there's moral and behavioural truths. And we all know what those moral and behavioural truths are. And that's why we're sat surrounded by hundreds of people, and everyone's behaving themselves, and everyone's being polite, because these moral and behavioural truths are inbuilt in us. I don't think that he's appealing to me because he references religious cultures and religious texts, but I do find the way he does that fascinating. And if anything, I think it just adds to the strength of his arguments.
Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily think it's because he references those texts. I think it's more like the fact that once you take away religion, which is an existing structure, and it can be a lifestyle, it can be a culture, and it can give you all of these kinds of lines to follow, which give you a sense of purpose or a sense of meaning, right? We've talked a lot about meaning today. Once you lose the faith in the religion for what it is, it's like, okay, so then there's now a void. So what do you then build yourself on? What are the lines which you kind of measure yourself by, if that makes sense? And all I'm saying is that I feel like some of what he does is fill that void. Do you know what I mean? And it doesn't necessarily have to rely on you believing in something which can't be proven, or that, you know, that will necessarily turn people off who are like atheists. It can kind of just apply to anyone if they want it to. Does that make sense? Whereas a lot of people are like, well, you know, religion is outdated, and if you look at it next to science, it just doesn't stand up, so therefore, like, it's got nothing for me. Whereas what he does is he takes everything, kind of mixes it together, and therefore you've now at least got a framework where you can start building from, regardless of if you accept everything that he's put in that framework. It's kind of there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, that's the great sin of religion, well, especially Christianity, at least of the last sort of 100 years, is that what it's done is it's given people two options, where you either have to believe in the literal creation of Adam and the literal flood and be a Bible literalist, or you have to be a complete atheist. And the reality is, as with any topic, the truth is somewhere in the middle. There's a lot to be learned from religious texts of all religions. To just abandon that completely is staggeringly naive of anybody, even of the atheists. Even when you speak about guys like Sam Harris, who are big atheists, they will still accept that there are parts of the Bible that, at least morally speaking, are relevant to our culture. What I find really fascinating about the religious texts that Peterson references a lot is that these guys, 1,000 years ago, 300 years ago, were discussing exactly the same problems of existence that we discuss now.
Which are?
Man's search for meaning. You know, it's fascinating to me that from the birth of time, you go back, 250,000 years ago, every culture of mankind, every tribe of mankind has had some sort of belief system. Whether it was worshipping the sun, or worshipping Mother Nature, or the Incas and the Mayans doing human sacrifices and rolling heads downstairs of temples, you know, to now a more civilized version of that, where our sacrifice now is abstract rather than literal. Every single generation of mankind has ever walked the earth had a belief system. That's fascinating to me. Why? Why has mankind never, ever, ever, ever been enough for himself, just to exist by himself? But we never have. We've always had to have something more. You know, so that our search for meaning has existed for as long as we've existed. I don't know what the answer to that is, but it's a fascinating, you know, it's a fascinating crossroads.
How would you link that search for meaning to where we are at with this crisis of masculinity at the moment? Like, how would you link those two things?
So the crisis of masculinity, if we're accepting that there is one, and that's debatable, but I believe there is one, regardless of whether you link that back to the rise of feminism or to the lack of competition in schools, whatever you want to link it back to, it's not deep enough. Those answers just aren't deep enough, because these problems with mankind and crises of masculinity have existed right back to Socrates. You know, Socrates wrote about exactly the same stuff, you know, 1,000 years ago that Peterson writes about now. You know, that's something that's really worth exploring. And I think the crisis really comes from the fact that we don't teach our young children, our young people rather, at all, to look for meaning in their life, or even what meaning is that conversation that are being had, and to adopt responsibility. And I think the crisis of masculinity comes back to a fact that we are lacking meaning in our lives, and I mean on an individual level, not on a social level, and that is a void that can only be filled with meaning. And meaning is different to setting goals, and we know that because people set goals and they reach them, and many athletes will tell you they reach the pinnacle of their sport, Olympic gold medals, heavyweight titles, and then spiral into a deep depression. Well, why is that? It's because there's no meaning in their life. They've achieved a goal, which is amazing, and we need goals in life, but that's different to meaning. Meaning is much deeper. And I once heard it expressed like this. So people will argue about the meaning of life, yeah, constantly. Is there a meaning to life? Is there a purpose? And if we say there is a meaning to life, then we'll argue that the meaning to life is subjective. It's different from you than it is to me. See, I would argue the opposite of that. I think the meaning of life is universal and it applies to everybody. I think you and I can have different goals, different desires, different wants, different ambitions, but the meaning of our life is essentially the same, and it's this. And I think, and you can argue, but I think it's inarguable. Right? I think it's watertight. The first one would be to, when we look around and we see, if you walk down the street and you saw a child in pain, what would you do?
Try and help. Try and see what's wrong and see
try and alleviate that child's pain
in
in whatever way you can. Well, that's a meaning. There you go, that's a meaning. You do that every time you get that opportunity, and that's a meaning. And that's a meaning that supersedes you. It supersedes all of your ambitions. It supersedes all of your petty wants and your aims. You know, most of our aims are petty. It supersedes everything, because in that moment, all that matters is alleviating that child's pain. And we know that if we're in pain, physical or emotional, all that matters in that moment is how do we get out of pain as quickly as we possibly can, because suffering is awful and we want to alleviate our own suffering. So if we can transcend ourselves and say, well, when I'm suffering, it's awful. So if I see someone else suffering, I will try my best to alleviate that as much as I possibly can. Right? There's a meaning. Second is for you to become as useful a person as you possibly can, which seems trivial, right? It seems like a trite point to make. But you know, even on a very basic level, if you hire a plasterer to come to your house, right? And the plasterer does a really shitty job, just a really, really shitty job. And then you've paid him the money, and now you've got to pay another guy to come back and do it and redo it, and maybe the wiring's got to be redone because you got all that wet, and it's just caused mayhem that goes on for weeks and weeks and weeks. It's caused you a problem. Just be a useful person. Do your job right. Whatever it is that you do it correctly, all right? Live your life in such a way that you're not causing more trouble, okay? Even if it's neutral, right? But just be useful. Just be as useful as you possibly can, because this functions better when we're all useful to each other. And the third thing is to actively search out and speak the truth. Try and transcend your own feelings and your own biases. Find out what is true and speak that truth forward, especially to young people. Now, all of those three things, as far as I can see, make life worth living to some degree, and act as an anchor to the suffering and malevolence that is 1,000% going to come your way at some point in life. So even if you can just look at the good that surrounds you, ease some suffering, just make sure you're a useful person. Don't cause any harm, you know, and try and be truthful. No one can argue with those three things, but on the back of those three things will come the success that you want in your goals and in your personal life. But if those three things are the bedrock, the foundation of your life, and the way in which you live your life, everything else will flow from that. And I don't believe that those three things are subjective. I believe them to be objective truths.
I'll go with that and say I agree with all of those three things, but what is it about those three things, and men specifically, that means that maybe a lot of men are struggling to do those three things compared to women? Why are those three things particularly an issue when we're talking about masculinity and men, that makes it distinct potentially from how it would be for women? Do you think women are already doing that stuff a bit more? Do you think it's like a societal thing?
I think, I don't know all the answers to this, but I think, generally speaking, women have their shit together a lot sooner than men do, okay? Yeah, and the biological evidence backs that up as well. And obviously, I think part of the reason for that is because you have a biological clock, and that biological clock is ticking. By the time you get to 30, your chances of conceiving and being a mother diminish rapidly. Men can be Peter Pan until they're 50 or 60. They can avoid responsibility for much longer than a woman can. So maybe on a biological level, women already have a huge meaning to aim at. You know, if you're a mother, well, there's your meaning. There's your meaning for the next 20 years. You've already got a meaning. Men can walk away from that, and men can avoid that until they're 50 years old.
And there's the added thing, I would say, like, I guess there's the added thing as well, of whether or not a woman wants to have kids or not, the societal thing when she's, you know, a teenager or whatever is that she's kind of being prepared to be aware that you are going to close off those options if you don't have your shit together.
Yeah.
Then that option may not be open to you. Whereas guys are not necessarily being taught that. I don't have the impression when I was growing up, I definitely didn't feel like the guys around me, and I did grow up in a particular kind of community, but like the guys around me were not being told the same things that we were being told. It was reinforced to us that like, whether or not you think you want it now, if you're not careful, you're going to close off that option.
Yes.
And so a lot of women don't want kids, you know,
No.
and they don't, and for them that's not going to bring them meaning, and they're
No.
perfectly happy not to have that. But it is kind of ingrained in you to kind of leave that open.
Yeah.
Whereas it's not in guys.
And no, it's not, absolutely not. And again, because guys, biologically speaking, can reproduce into their 60s and 70s, women can't. And there's biological reasons for these things as well. And I think you're right, there's an awful lot of women that don't want children and won't find their meaning that way, but the vast majority of women do want children and will go on to be mothers. You know, so maybe that's the reason. And I think there are some things that are just uniquely masculine, that even women look for those traits in their men. Women, generally speaking, want a man that's got his shit together. They want a man that takes responsibility for himself. They want a man that can say no when it's appropriate to say no. They want a man that can be gentle when it's appropriate to be gentle. They want a man that can be strong and aggressive even when it's appropriate to be strong and aggressive. And there are so many traits that are uniquely, well, not uniquely, women can have these traits too, but that men need that we're just not teaching our young men at all in any way.
What I find really interesting is all those things that you've listed, I feel like women have been saying that for a while, and you know, especially like women looking for partners or like mothers will often tell their sons, you know, you've got to try and get your shit together, and they're trying to push them in that direction. But what I find really interesting is that Peterson come along and said, make your bed in the morning.
Yeah.
And I've had so many guys, they see me reading a book on the tube or whatever, they come over and they said, Jordan Peterson, like that whole like making your bed in the morning, it really changed my life. And I'm like, your mum didn't tell you to do that.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
it's
what
the
is
same.
it about Jordan Peterson saying that is so different and actually gets more of an effect than that being said for time from like teachers, your mum?
Your mum telling you to tidy your room is in case the neighbours come around for tea and she wants to show the house off. Jordan Peterson telling you to clean your room, he goes on and adds the context of that. If you can't govern your immediate surroundings, don't expect to be able to govern anything else in your life. It's naivety. And we have that. We have that. We have so many men that do not have the most basic elements of their life in order. And I included me in this for a long time. And then are wondering why I can't understand why my life's not working out. I can't understand why I can't find a decent girl. I can't understand why I'm not getting the job that I want. So Peterson says, right, start there. Because all of these other things that you wish for or that you want for, they can be added onto you, but you have to start here. And now we live in a culture that we're so obsessed with reaching the pinnacle of whatever hierarchy we're in that we want to go from step 1 to step 6 and miss out steps 1 to 5. You know? So your mum telling you to turn the room or your teacher doing it doesn't have the same emphasis as a man saying, no, you do this because it leads to everything else that you're looking for in your life. You know, and I believe that to be true. The small things, this is the interesting thing about small things. The small things, they're not small. They're not small. The small things make up 80% of your existence. 80% of what we do is the small stuff, yeah? You know, the way you talk to your wife or your boyfriend on a morning, or the way you interact with a train driver that you see every day. 80% of your life is these small things. You get those small things right, you've got 80% of your life put together.
Do you not think that part of the reason why Peterson might be more successful at getting through to men is also because he is a man, and him saying it, it's almost like he is a role model. He's almost like the father figure, the wise guy that says that.
Of course.
I guess that's kind of one of the things that comes across
yeah, of course.
to me, I guess.
And I had this conversation with someone the other day. I think we'd put a post up on the internet about the statistics for guys that grow up in fatherless homes and how they struggle in almost every area of life, like massively struggle in every area of life. And the girl took offence at it, saying, well, what is it that a man can teach a boy that a mother can't? Which a lot of people ask that question, but it's, men need men to teach them how to be men, right? From the one hand, a woman can't do that on account of you never having been a man. And to try and give you a better analogy of that, so my son is football mad at the moment, okay? He supports Tottenham. His favourite player in the world is Harry Kane, okay? Harry Kane is his be-all and end-all, is his hero in life, in everything. Well, why isn't his hero Tiger Woods? Or why isn't his hero Mike Tyson? Because they don't play the same sport he wants to play. So there's no relevance to him there to have Tiger Woods as his hero when what he does and wants to aspire to do is football. So he looks for someone that's doing the same thing as him. And that's why young men need men in order to teach them how to be men. You know, that single mums do an amazing job. Like, single mums are some of the biggest, you know, underrated heroes of our culture. But only a man can teach a boy how to genuinely be a man and take that responsibility. Now, I don't know why that is. I don't have the way to articulate exactly why it's essential that a man teaches a man. All I know is that all of the statistics that we have over the last 50 years show that when a man is not in the home, yeah, disastrous things happen to the people that are left behind.
It's almost like a cycle though, isn't it? You know, it could swing either way. Like, you either see it as something that you definitely are like, I don't want to be like my father and I want to be completely different, and then lots of people would be like, right, this is something I want to construct the family that I never had.
Yeah.
Or you don't have that role model to do that, and therefore you struggle to be the father that you didn't have.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, we've all seen examples of that.
Yeah, yeah. Without a male figure in the home, you know, the children that are left behind struggle, and we know this. Without two-parent families, the statistics for that child dropping out of high school early, or, you know, going into drugs early, or being incarcerated, they rise tenfold. You know, do we know exactly why this is? Well, no, but we do know that the one element that exists in all of these variables is the fact that the guy's not around. You know, so maybe rather than being so fixated on, well, single mothers do a great job, which they absolutely do, we should be fixated on, there's a problem here that's been manifesting itself for the last 50 years that the data backs up, that says when the man is not there, you know, when a child is not being raised by a two-parent family, catastrophic things are occurring and the family's being broken down. So you know what? Actually, yeah, maybe masculinity is essential to society. Maybe real men are essential to society, and the data backs all of that up.
As I said at the beginning of the video, if you're affected by any of the issues that we've spoken about, there are links below for people that you can speak to. The other videos are on the screen now, and like, comment and subscribe to stay up to date with the rest of the series.